Today is Wednesday, November 19th, 1997. My name is Debbie Brookstein, and I'm interviewing Helen Brodkey. Helen, could you state your full name, including your maiden name, and your birth date, please?
Helen Friedman Brodkey, my birthday. Do I want to tell you how old I am? I'm just thinking. June 3rd.
June 3rd, 19-something or other.
That's right.
Okay, it will remain a secret. Tell me about how you came to Omaha.
I came to Omaha to live when I was married to David Brodkey. But before that, this was my second home. My father had 3 sisters who married and lived in Omaha: Martha Tuckman, Ruth Sterling, and Minnie Margolin. And they had children. We were very, very close in age. And I just felt like this was my second home. I came to enjoy and be with them.
What city did you grow up in?
In Sioux City. In Sioux City.
Mm-hmm.
My father came to this country in 1908 with my mother, and he did not know where he was going when he landed in New York, but the Jewish Welfare Board came to his rescue, and he knew that he had a yeshiva bocher friend who lived in Sioux City, Iowa, and that's where they sent him. And no one knew that they were coming. They got on a train. They didn't know how long they'd be on the way, but they were, and they got to Sioux City in the middle of the night and sat in the station for daybreak till they could start walking. They didn't know where, but to someone who would help them. And that was the story of how they arrived. And after that, the family, they kept bringing the family, always bringing someone from the family. As long as I can remember, someone was always coming from Europe. And they came to our home, and we were raised with them, and we were family. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your siblings.
My sisters. I have 3 sisters. Dorothy, who is 17 months younger than me, and my twin sisters, the Friedman twins, as they were called in Sioux City. My sister Dorothy died 3 years ago, my soulmate, and the twins are very, very close, and we are in constant touch.
Where do the twins live?
One lives in Chicago. Epi lives in Chicago. That's Esther, lives in Chicago. And Popo is Pauline, and she lives in L.A. Mm-hmm.
Are those the newspaper?
That is true.
Would you like to tell us who they are?
They are Dear Abby and Ann Landers.
Okay.
They are the famous, what should I call them, advice
columnists, sure.
Advice columnists.
Sure.
And that's what they are.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Very popular, very well known around the world.
Was David from Omaha?
Yes. The Brodkey family lived here. I think their original date was 1900. And in the business, they started as a loan company on Lower Douglas Street. And then they moved up farther west as years went on. And the Brodkey Jewelry Company was at 1419 Douglas. And my David had 2 brothers. Edward was the oldest. Fritz, or Fred, was the middle one. And David was the youngest. And he was 1 year older than me. And I met him here on a blind date. And we corresponded for 7 years until he felt that he could afford a wife. And we lived with his mother for 3 years after we were married until we were able to see a family, and that's when we moved to our own home.
Where did his mother live?
His mother lived at 3322 Webster. And that's where we married and lived there.
What was that neighborhood like?
It was wonderful. It was quiet. And Rabbi Goldstein, if you remember him, Debbie, before your time here, lived just across the street. And did you remember Hinky Ringle? He had a grocery, he had a drugstore on Underwood Avenue. And the Rosses, the whole neighborhood was just lovely, wonderful, friendly Jewish people. I never realized it until I started thinking about it, that I never had a Gentile friend and never lived in a Gentile neighborhood until after we started our family. And we lived at 4568 Shirley Street. That was the first place where we rented a home for $65 a month. And we furnished it gradually until we had our second child and we moved into Loveland, which was a cornfield at that time. People thought we were insane to go that far out of town. We had septic tanks and no sewers at that time. And Ron went to Loveland School, and it went from kindergarten to the 8th grade in one room. It was a country school.
What was your address in Loveland?
4568 Shirley was 1107 Ridgewood Avenue. And it's passed down, I think it's had 5 or 6 owners since we bought it. And I would hate to tell you what we paid for that house, but I will. $10,000. And today, I think the last person who bought it paid in the neighborhood of $300,000 for it. Of course, everyone who owned it has always improved it and enlarged it. And now, before I came here, I lived at Regency. Who would have dreamed that I would live that far west? Never. But when the children got a certain age, we felt that they should be with Jewish children. So then we moved into town. When they went to Dundee School and Bethel Synagogue.
Oh, so you moved then from Ridgewood back in?
To Omaha. 1107 Ridgewood, and we moved to 1126 North 58th and Western Avenue.
Let's back up to when you were first married. Did you marry in Omaha?
Strangely enough, no. We married in Council Bluffs, and there's a story about that. My mother's father and mother lived with us. They didn't until they got up in years and needed the care and attention. And there were no such things as a retirement home or nursing homes. So Bubby and Zadie lived with their children. And I remember them coming to live with us. And that's how I learned how to speak Yiddish, which is still music to my ears. We have a class here now that Rabbi Mendel Katzman teaches us, Hooked on Yiddish. And I just love going to that class. But my mother's mother, my Bubby, died in our home of a brain cancer. And we couldn't see ourselves postponing the wedding. But I knew that if we stayed in Sioux City, we could not have the privacy that we wanted. And my father's family lived here in Omaha, and those people coming from Sioux City would be the most immediate family. So we figured out we could marry very conveniently for everyone in Council Bluffs, and that's what we did.
In a synagogue or in a civil ceremony?
No, in the Chieftain Hotel. Gene Epley, that name may ring a bell. A lot of people don't know, who was Gene Epley? There's so many places in Omaha that are named Epley. Who was he? He was a hotel owner. He had a chain of hotels. Sioux City had the Martin Hotel, and Council Bluffs he had the Chieftain Hotel. And he was my father's friend. So when my father and he were talking one day, and he mentioned that his daughter was going to be married in Council Bluffs, he said, why don't you have her get married at the Chieftain Hotel? I have a suite of rooms there, and you're welcome. So that's what we did.
Where was the Chieftain?
I can't tell you the exact location of it. I really can't. I wasn't, and I still am not too familiar with Council Bluffs. But it was a very beautiful, prominent hotel at that time.
So then you lived with your mother-in-law?
We lived with Mother Brodkey for 3 years. Fritz got married before we did, but very shortly before. And Ed stayed at home, so we were a family. And we did not leave Mother Brodkey with Ed. One of her daughters, Sarah Dansky, and her family moved in and lived with her. And that's the way it went all these years.
Were all of Mother Brodkey's children involved in the jewelry and loan business?
No, just the boys were. But then, Sarah Dansky, whose husband was a dentist, gave up his practice to help them because they were young. And they felt that that's what they needed, guidance and advice, and they respected him for that. And that's what they did. So a little drink of water, right? There we go.
What synagogue were you affiliated with when you first got married?
Bethel Synagogue,
Where was it located?
in the Jewish Community Center. Then they moved services to a Knights of Columbus Hall, not too far away, about a block away from the Jewish Community Center. And then, of course, fundraising for the Bethel Synagogue at 49th and Farnham. And we have been members of Bethel in all these many years. Proud to say, very devoted, very devoted.
Were services in the Jewish Community Center downtown?
Yes. It was at
Initially.
20th and Dodge, in that building. And we would hold services in the auditorium there. Now, my mother-in-law, of course, was affiliated with the Orthodox. I remember sitting on the balcony with her during services because women were separated from the men. But she was a very unusual person, greatly admired. When she realized all her children were going to be at a different synagogue and we were going to be at the Jewish Community Center, she chose to make a change in her life to be with them because she felt it was very important to be with family, especially for holidays and services. And that's what she did.
So tell me about your family, your children.
My children, we have 2 sons, Ron, who's married to Beth. Ron met Beth in Oklahoma because they both went to school at Norman in Oklahoma
Can we back up to when they were children?
when they were children, growing up. What would you like me to tell them about them?
What schools they attended, where they might have gone to religious school, or who some of the rabbis and religious school teachers were, some of the families you associated with?
Well, when we moved into town, of course, we were close to Bethel, but we used to take them to the synagogue and be with them when they went to Talmud Torah there.
Who was the rabbi initially at Bethel?
Rabbi Kripke, right, at that time, Cantor Edgar, and Rabbi Katz, devoted. I remember, you know Ozzie Nog? Her father. a wonderful, much-loved teacher, much loved. And that's where they went to Hebrew school. But before we went into town, I used to schlep them, and that was quite a distance, and that was before we had radial tires. We had to have chains on our tires to plow through the snow. And I remember when my parents came to visit us, and I would have to say, I'm sorry, I got to take them to Talmud Torah. In the blizzard, in the snow, and the chains on the tires and the fenders. And my father would say to me, what do you think you are accomplishing? Do you think they're going to be a rabbi? And I said, no, I wouldn't want them to be. I just want them to know they're Jewish. And I think they do. I know they do. Mm-hmm.
Were you involved with any Jewish organizations?
Always with Hadassah. As long as I can remember, the first organization outside of the Synagogue Sisterhood, I always belonged to Hadassah. I was a Zionist, grew up in a Zionist home and atmosphere. My parents were Zionists. We know that someday there would be a Jewish homeland. That was a dream that we knew would one day materialize. And it did. And we went there. We went to Israel, made trips there. But we always raised funds for Israel. Mm-hmm.
Is that the kind of work you did with Hadassah, was fundraising?
Yes. I was the chapter president at one time. And we looked for different avenues of raising funds because we could never raise too much. We knew the need was great. Mm-hmm.
What kind of projects were you involved in?
Hadassah Medical Organization was primary. Jewish National Fund was very important. Youth Aliyah was very important. We raised funds for the linen shower. Every way we knew how, and I was extremely devoted to the Hadassah Bargain Box because it came to be during my administration.
Where was it first located?
Well, we had a little store on 16th and, Leavenworth it could have been, right? And then we had another one on Farnham, over by the Twin Towers. And from there we moved to another store near Cole's Drug on Leavenworth. We had to keep moving, and we always had volunteer help. We never paid a salary, but today they have to. Sad to say.
Do you recall any of the other Hadassah volunteers that you worked with?
As a matter of fact, I'm sitting outside in the hall today after lunch, and a woman came by, and I thought I recognized her, so I introduced myself, and she said, I'm Ann White. I worked with you in Hadassah Bargain Box, and I hadn't seen her in years, in many years. Interestingly enough, too, Sam Greenberg had retired at that time.
And he had what business?
Sam Greenberg from Phillips Department Store in South Omaha had just retired. And I called him one day to ask him if he would paint some signs for us. And he said, that's my hobby, painting signs. When do you want me? I said, yesterday. And he said, I'll be there tomorrow. And from that time on, he decorated the store with signs, he painted the windows, he washed the windows. He was a wonderful helper to us. Oh yes, I can name a lot of people that came to the Bargain Box and worked with us through the years. But today, like I say, sad to say, we don't have volunteers enough. They have to pay salaries, and they pay very high rents. Now they're at Herald Square. Harold Cooperman had a room vacated there, and we had to move from Leavenworth Street, I was told. So they decided that's where they would move. I was no longer active, And they went to Harold Cooperman, and he made this room available to them, and that's where the bargain box is today. I have yet not gone to see it, but I intend to. I want very much to go there to see it. Mm-hmm.
What did you do with Bethel Sisterhood?
I did fundraising for Bethel. I was convinced when I was offered the presidency that I didn't deserve it, because the ethics of the synagogue were such that I did not keep a kosher kitchen because I did not believe in it. And I did believe that the sisterhood president should be one who did that. So for that reason, I said I would always raise funds, and I did, and enjoyed it. But I couldn't go into an elective office. Mm-hmm.
Who were some of the presidents at Bethel of this sisterhood?
Well, there was Vi Greenberg. The Greenberg family was, Vi Greenberg was Saul Parcel's mother-in-law. Lee Jane is Vi Greenberg's mother, right? They were very, very strongly engrossed in the synagogue activities. Saul Parcel comes by it naturally. Look what he's done for Bethel, Lee Jane and their sons, right? Bess Brodkey was a president of the Bethel Synagogue at one time.
How is Bess Brodkey related to you?
Her husband, Dr. Morris Brodkey, was a cousin. All the Brodkeys are related. There were 9 brothers in that original family. Their pictures are shown in the hall at the Jewish Community Center, the Hall of Memories that they have there that lead now to the synagogue. They're all shown there. Mm-hmm. My family and members of the family and their friends are framed in that hall. Mm-hmm. Beautifully enshrined.
What were some of the other businesses in Omaha that the Brodkeys were involved in?
None, except State Furniture. Excuse me, I should mention that. State Furniture, one of their uncles, Uncle Ben, was one of them, and their children, Harold Brodkey, Edwin Brodkey. Did you know them? You didn't know them. Mm-hmm. Then they had a fire that wiped them out. And from that moment on, after they'd been there for many, many years, from that moment on, their business interests changed. But they were the first people that Rose Blumkin came to compete with, the State Furniture Company.
Where was the State Furniture store located?
It was across the street from the Union Pacific building now. Where is that? 15th or 14th and Dodge, right? And I think they were right in there. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, who are your children?
Well, Ron is married to Beth, and I told you they met in Oklahoma where they went to school. And Bob is married to Florence Zvidovic, and they met in Israel. Bob was working, first when he went to school, he went to Dartmouth College. And then he went to Princeton. And then he wanted to be a public servant. Ron is interested in business, and Bob is interested in public service. So he became a member of a force from the Department of Defense that went to Bangkok. And he lived there for 4.5 years. But on the way to Bangkok, he decided to take a leave of absence, and he stopped in Israel and decided to go to an Opan so that he could speak better Hebrew and read better Hebrew. And Florence came from Paris. She was born in Bordeaux because she wanted to make Aliyah. and to live in Israel. So she too decided to go to an opan to freshen and make herself more conversant, and they met in this opan, which is a Hebrew-speaking school, teaching school, and that's where they met.
Can we back up to their childhood? What grade school did they go to?
They went to Loveland School and they went to Dundee, and that was their school.
Who were some of their friends when they were small?
Well, the Farbers moved out to Loveland eventually. The Richards, Suzanne and Mort Richards, not Suzanne and Mort, Ruthie Rikus Richards. The Klutzniks moved there. And Abe Baker and his family came from a little town in Iowa where they had a little grocery store, and they lived out in Loveland too. It was not a large, Barney Fink and his wife, Margaret, and the Richards, because Margaret Fink and Ruthie Rikus were sisters, and they had adjoining lots, and they lived next to each other.
What businesses were they involved in?
Rikus, originally, the synagogue, of course, as you well know, is named for them. Bottling, glassware, I think so. Now, my mother-in-law had 3 daughters, and she had 3 sons, and the daughters were all older, and the sons were all younger. So that was our family.
Did your sisters-in-law live in Omaha?
All but one. Esther Sherman married Ben Sherman. They lived in Des Moines. All the rest of her children lived here in Omaha.
And who did
And
they?
eventually Esther and Ben moved here, and they went into business in the silk shop. Do you remember anything about the silk shop here in Omaha? It was right next to Brodkey Jewelry at 15th and Douglas, 1419 Douglas. And that's the business that Ben Sherman went into. Then all her children lived here.
And then what about your other 2 sisters-in-law? Who did they marry?
One sister-in-law, I told you, married Sarah Dansky, married Doc Dansky, the dentist. The other, Rose, married Sam Rice. And you may be familiar with their family, Bud Rice. David Rice married Esther Zarinsky. No. And Esther Sherman, the 3 daughters.
Were there any other Jewishly owned businesses located near Brodkey's?
Well, not very close, but around, because there were department stores. Like Brandeis was only a block away. Kilpatrick's was less than that block away. But no, the Virginia restaurant, which you are not, I'm sure you're not familiar with at all, was right next door. Nebraska Clothing was just a block away. They were the center hub of downtown Omaha, because as you went from 15th and Douglas to 16th and Douglas, you passed all of Kilpatrick's, Nadelson's, Herzberg's. Any of those familiar to you? No, those were all stores. Most of them belonged to Jews.
Who were some of the families that owned them?
The families that owned Herzberg's, Dave Goldman married Angela Herzberg. Rube Nadelson, I don't know. They were older than we were, so I don't know what family connections they had.
How did Brodkey's jewelry and loan evolve through the years?
Well, they had their downtown store, and then they had another store on 16th and Harney, named Edwards for his older brother, right? Then we realized that traffic was moving west and the malls were detracting from traffic. And we had to have stores out west. So then we had to go in the malls, and that's what happened. The stores downtown eventually closed down, and now there are 11 Brodkey stores throughout Nebraska and 2 in Des Moines. No, 3 in Iowa, because there's 1 in the Mall of the Bluffs and 2 in Des Moines. In Fremont and Grand Island and Hastings, and that's what I had.
Was your husband always involved with Brodkey's until his retirement?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And what about yourself?
Myself, I never worked a day in my life. Never.
For pay. You worked. It sounds like you were a hard worker.
No, I was a homebody. I stayed home with my children.
Did you and your husband go on any buying trips for the stores?
No, because his department was not the buying department. Fritz would buy. But David never went on any buying trips. It was management more to his liking, and that's where he concentrated.
Who did you and your husband socialize with?
Who were our friends? Goes a long time back. Laser Kaplan lived back to back with them on Webster Street, and I'm told that they rigged up some kind of a machine of some kind so they could converse back to back. Those little boys did, right? Sal Gretz, and he worked for Brodkey's for many years. He was the controller there. Isber Kovasi, you don't remember the name, Mober Kovasi, was an actuary. And
You socialized with these men and their wives and families.
right, David Bilak, you don't know that name. Very good friends who also worked with us. Someone thought that he might even be a Brodkey, very close friend. Right.
Was your husband involved in any synagogue work or any men's organizations?
He served 1 term on the board of Bethel, but his interests were not directed toward that activity. But interestingly enough, our sons are. Our sons are. Ron, even though he was born and raised in Bethel Synagogue, Beth was a child from a Reformed temple in Oklahoma City. And she was most uncomfortable at Bethel because she couldn't read the service, and she didn't know what the service involved. And she felt strange and uncomfortable there. So they came to us and told us that they had discussed it, and they came to discuss it with us, because they had decided that they would like to transfer their membership to Temple Israel. And we said, Gesundheit, hate, go with our blessing. Now, Bob is very active with his synagogue in Arlington, where they live, on the Beltway outside of Washington, D.C. And his wife is too. But she's very fluent in Hebrew. Very fluent in Hebrew. And their children are.
Can you talk about some of the work that Ron and Beth have done in the community?
In this community? Well, they're very active in their temple. And I don't know that Ron was active in youth organizations. I don't believe that Bob was either. Not that I would have objected to it. I would certainly not have objected to it, but I don't think they expressed an interest in it. As far as I can recollect, they did not. But Beth has her own business, you know. She has her store, Bags and Baggage, which is a beautiful store and very well known and very well thought of. And she's always done some business, even when she stayed at home before her children went to school. She always had some kind of a business from her home, because I think that's where her mind goes. But she's very active in the temple, always has been. And so is Ron.
Tell me about your grandchildren.
Well, Beth and Ron have Sharon and Mark, Alfred Mark. Mark was named for his grandfather, Gladstein, who died on the day he was born. I remember going and staying with Sharon when Beth went to Oklahoma City. She gave birth here in Omaha. And then her mother moved here, you know, some years later, and lived at the Blumkin home and just died less than a year ago.
Where does Mark live?
Mark has his own home, and so does Sharon. Sharon married an Israeli. Sharon went to school in Israel, Hebrew University. And one of my most cherished dreams of having met with her in Israel while she was going to school there.
Did you and your husband travel often?
Yes, we did. We enjoyed traveling. It wasn't easy to get him away from the store. But we went to Israel, and then we went to Bangkok to visit Bob. So we went through the Orient. And Bob was not allowed to go to certain areas in that area, certain places in that area, because he was working as an official in the Defense Department. But he was able to join us in Hong Kong. So he did that. And we were the last plane out of Angkor Wat. We went there to see the ancient ruins, and the Vietnam War was close to us then. But we escaped that, and we went to Hong Kong and came home from there on a wonderful trip. We had been to Israel before that, too. We went to Europe. We went by ship to Europe and went to Paris and London and went to Rome and then Israel from Rome.
Does Bob have children?
Bob has 2 children, David, named for his grandfather, and Naomi. David was bar mitzvah 2 years ago, and Ron and Beth went to the bar mitzvah. I was not able to go at that time, so I wasn't. Beautiful children. Beautiful children.
And they live in Virginia?
They live in Arlington. And Sharon lives here in Omaha. She was married to an Israeli, and she has she has a son who is my great-grandson, Ariel. He is a joy, and she's my precious Sharon. And I'm glad to have them close by, right here where they belong. So she bought a home not too far from where Beth and Ron live, right around the corner, from Jean Brandt, who was a supervisor here, the administrator. And the word got around that he was going to be leaving, and he lived right around the corner from Beth and Ron, and she went over and saw the house. And so they made a deal between them. They didn't have an agent. So Sharon bought that house.
Where does she work?
She works at KKAR, Mitchell Broadcasting. She lived in Chicago after they were married. She and Yaron, after they were married here in Omaha at the Temple, lived in Chicago. And she, too, had an interest in being out in the community and working. She just loves to work, and she's always found herself doing something she enjoyed. And so she had a lot of experience there. So when she went to work for KAR, it really did pay off. It worked very nicely. She has a good position there, and she's well liked.
Tell me about the last few years in your life.
The last few years. Well, when I found myself alone, we had moved from our home at 56th and Western to an apartment, Tiffany Tower, at 49th and Chicago. So it would be close to the store for him to drive downtown. After I found myself alone, all my friends were living out west, and I was really isolated in that area on Chicago Street. So I decided, and the children encouraged me to move to a western part of the city. So I took an apartment at Regency, and I lived there for about 11 or 12 years. Lived about Tiffany Towers about 11 years, and then out west to Regency. And then I found myself not enjoying good health. I was having problems. And that's when I had to give up my apartment and move here in the Jewish home. And I anticipated that someday that could happen. And I did something. I took out insurance, nursing home insurance. I didn't anticipate inflation at that time, but it's okay. I highly recommend it. I think people should know that someday if they're alone, that's what they'll have to do. And I wouldn't live with my children, and I don't think they'd want me to live with them. I'm too independent, and so are they. And they're busy, and I would be a burden to them, and I never wanted to be. So I anticipated this is what I would have to do. And I took out a policy with the help and guidance of my nephew, David Rice. And here I am, very comfortable, very happy here, no complaints.
You seem to have a very rich and active life here.
I am active here. I feel that you have to go with the flow. The activities that I'm interested in are not in my room. And the activity program here is enormously, enormously fulfilling. But you have to go to them. And that's what I do. I keep very, very busy. The library at the J, I enjoy. And the activities at the J, I enjoy. So I am very active in this whole hub of the Jewish Community Center, which is wonderful. I think we have so much to be proud of here. Very few communities. We're a model community in every way. When people come here from out of town to work or to live here because they're moving along in their own careers, professional people, they are amazed at what goes on in Omaha, Nebraska. They are so impressed, and they have a right to be. We are very proud.
Helen, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
It was a pleasure. I enjoyed being here, and thank you. I'm Friedman Brodkey. I was born in Sioux City, Iowa on June 3rd, 1911. My father's name was Abraham Friedman. My mother's name was Rebecca Rushall Friedman. I was the eldest of 4 daughters. My younger daughter was Dorothy, who was 18 months younger, and my twin sisters were born on July 4th. I can't remember the year, but it doesn't matter. They're going to be 84, and they are known as Dear Abby and Ann Landers. Very famous, and deservedly so. I don't see them too often, but we talk on the telephone all the time. And last year they were here for my 90th birthday. And we had a ball, and here are all the pictures on my bulletin board to show you. What else can I tell you? I went to school in Sioux City, went to Central High, and decided that I wanted to study dramatic art. And my parents were willing to send me to Chicago, to the Goodman Art Theater, where I went to school until the banks closed and the market crashed, and my father called and said, "You'd better come home. Your checks are going to bounce, so come on back," which I did. I met David Brodkey on a blind date. My cousin, who lived here in Omaha, told me that we were going to have a party, and she was going to arrange a blind date. Now, you have to understand the traffic between Sioux City and Omaha was very, very busy all the time. There were people coming and going, back and forth. So I decided that I would come in for this party, and I met David Brodkey. And I never dated anyone else for 6 years, and neither did he. But we fell in love at first sight, and I was married on June 26th in Council Bluffs, of all places. My mother's mother, my grandmother, on my mother's side, died very shortly before the wedding date was planned, and I didn't want a big wedding, and I understood why my family wouldn't want a big wedding. My father happened to be friends of who owned the Chieftain Hotel in Council Bluffs, and he said, "If you want to, you may use my suite for a wedding," which we did, and we only had 18 people there, and we were married in August 6th.
What year was that?
19. I was 26. You figure it out.
(1937)
Could have been 36, 37. Okay, and that's when I came to Omaha to live. And my mother-in-law lived at 3322 Webster, and we knew that we had to conserve because it was a very tight economy at that time, lots of problems. So we lived with her for 3 years and paid her monthly rent and saved a little money on the side until we had accumulated enough so that we could rent a little house. And when Ron was born, we lived at 4568 Shirley Street, and we paid $65 a month rent there. And we lived there for 4 years until it was time for Bob to come on the scene. And I decided that we should live in the country. So I found a white brick colonial house on Ridgewood Avenue in Loveland. And we moved out there, and that's when Bob was born. And we lived out in the country, but we had Jewish neighbors. Barney Fink, Morton Richards, Phil Klutznick, Harold Farber, etc., etc. It was fun. A lovely neighborhood. We loved, enjoyed living out there. But there came a time when there weren't enough Jewish children their age. And that's when I decided that we had to move back into town, which we did. we bought the Gossick House on Western Avenue, 56th and Western Avenue, because the children could go to Dundee School and after high school could cross the street and go to the Jewish Community Center and be associated with Jewish children, which we did.
Let's go back to Sioux City. I want to hear everything about your father and mother.
My father. My father had various interests, business interests. He was very interested in the theater business, and he owned several theaters in Sioux City. And he had partners along the way, but that was his main object. He started with the grocery store, and he had younger brothers that was always interested in him and cared for them. And he always cared where they were going to live and what they were going to do. And he put them in various grocery stores around Sioux City in the small towns, like Lamar's, Salix. I remember that well. I used to visit those little towns when I was growing up because I loved visiting my family, no matter where. Parents were born in Russia, but they came from Harbin, Manchuria, because my father wanted to avoid military conscription. So they came to this country, and I'm not sure which way, and we never did find out which way, and we didn't ask. Strangely enough, it isn't unusual for children not to ask, and parents to forget to tell. So that's what happened there. So they came to this country, and they came through Ellis Island. I remember that because the Jewish Welfare Society met them there and said they were sending them to Sioux City, Iowa, which was Sioux City. And it was familiar to my father because he had a landslide from there, a yeshiva bocher who lived in Sioux City. So that's why they came to this area of the country.
Were your parents married in Russia?
They were married in Russia.
And were any of the children born in Russia?
I was born here. I was the first of their children.
Other than the theaters, then, what kind of work did your father do?
Real estate, a little of this and a little of that, always busy eking out a living and taking care of all of his family and his brothers and my mother's family.
Was it a large Jewish community in Sioux City?
My father and mother were very interested in bringing family over this country. And as long as I can remember, he had a note in the bank to guarantee travel expenses for them to come here. And they all were brought to Sioux City, my mother's whole family. From there, they went to the West Coast, and my whole mother's family all lived in California.
Was it a large family?
My mother didn't have a large family, but they were very devoted, very close.
Have you maintained contact with many of them over the years?
Yes, as long as possible. As long as possible. I always found it very important to keep in touch with family, no matter where they were. And I have, until this very day. Their children and their grandchildren.
Were there a lot of Jewish people living in Sioux City growing up?
You know, it's hard to imagine that now there are less than 400 Jewish families in Sioux City, Iowa. It just blows your mind to think of that. And I keep in very close touch with people there because I'm interested in who they are, where they are, and the cemetery. The maintenance of a cemetery there, Carmel, is very important to me because all my family is buried there. My grandparents are buried there.
My aunts and uncles are buried there. We have a family plot there. So it's important for me to know that it's cared for. And I do keep in touch with them to be sure that it is.
When you came to Omaha and married, what kind of work did your husband do?
The Brodkey Jewelry Company. He and his two other brothers, Ed, the oldest, Fritz, the next youngest, and he, my David, was the youngest of the three brothers. And they started in the loan business, in the jewelry business, which was established over 100 years ago. In 1910, the Brodkeys had a little pawn shop, and that's how it started on Douglas Street, on Lower Douglas Street. Then they moved up farther north in Douglas, kept going until they came to a corner on 1419 Douglas, which was the beginning of the Brodkey Jewelry Company.
Did you spend any time working in the jewelry store?
Never. No, never. I was a homebody. I loved being home with my children. Mm-hmm.
Can you talk to me a little bit about growing up in Sioux City?
Let me see, what can I remember that would be unusual? Just a lot of family all the time. The Jewish girls in Sioux City were not Hebrew educated. They just had a Melamed come to the house if there was a boy and teach him so that he could be bar mitzvahed. So we never had a Hebrew education. And to this day, I, of course, regret that. Mm-hmm.
Was your family religious?
Not religious, hardly observant, but very caring. Very caring.
Do you recall trips to the synagogue on holidays?
Well, until we had Shero Zion in Sioux City, we didn't have a synagogue. But eventually we raised enough money to build a synagogue. And my twin sisters were married there on the 2nd of July with no air conditioning and about 400 people. But it was fun. It was fun.
Were they both married at the same time?
Yes, they had a double wedding. They had a double wedding with 10 bridesmaids, groomsmaids, and no air conditioning on the 2nd of July.
Brings back a lot of memories, doesn't
You
it?
bet.
So how was it when you came to Omaha? Was that a big revelation, moving into a big city?
I can't say that I feel that it was, because this was my second home. I had spent so much time here growing up that I just felt like it was just part of my growing up and my second home. Mm-hmm. And my father's family lived here. My father's sister was Martha Tuckman. She was married to Frank Tuckman from the Tuckman Groceries, right? Remember that? My father's other sister was Ruth Sterling. She was married and lived here in Omaha. And it was her daughter who arranged a blind date for me and David Brodkey. Good, wonderful memories.
When you ended up living in Omaha, did you have a lot of Jewish friends that you maintained through the years?
Oh, yes, very much so. To this very day, where those who after all, I have survived so many of them.
Can you tell me about some of those friends?
Who were they? Well, Lorne Gross and Lucille, who's not Lucille Catlin now. Babe Nog, my cousin, married to Leo Nog, whom I'm in very close touch with all the time. It's just like family. But now that I'm living here, it's isolated me, and I've survived them, so many of them.
I'd like to hear about the raising of your two sons.
They're very close. Bob decided that he wanted to go into government, and he was a bright student, and he went to Dartmouth College. As a matter of fact, that's where he is now. He has his 40th family, 40th year reunion at Dartmouth this week. And I remember seeing him off on a train. He and Howard Weinberg went together to Dartmouth College. And the year after that, he went to Princeton. Very bright. A scholar.
What did he study?
He studied government. And today he's with FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. And he lives in Arlington, Virginia, where his family is, of course. And he and Ron are always in very close touch with each other. Ron's a big brother.
Tell me about Bob's children.
Bob has two children. David, named after my husband, and Naomi, who was just 15 yesterday. David goes to McGill University in Montreal, and this is very interesting. Bob decided at some point that he wanted to make a long stay in Israel. He'd been through the country several times, but he wanted to stay there long enough to be able to read a Hebrew newspaper. So he made an extended stay in Israel, possible at that time, on his way to Bangkok. Now, he was stationed with the Department of Defense at Bangkok for over 4.5 years. I knew that there were times when he was there that had to be very dangerous. And I was very worried about not getting mail from him when I didn't get a letter in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. I knew that there was a possibility that he was involved in some dangerous mission. So I remember calling the Department of Defense in Washington, D.C., and I wanted to know who the head of the department was. When I got him on the phone, I told him who I was, and my reason for calling was because I hadn't heard from my son. And please find out why. And he did. And he called me back to tell me that my son was safe, but he wasn't able to write, but he would now. And that's how that transpired. Now, David and I went to visit Bob when he was in Bangkok, and we went to Hong Kong from there. And we went through Angkor Wat, where not mountain, but temple rubbings came from.
Did Bob ever have any comment about your checking on him?
Well, he wished I hadn't done it, but he understood why. So we never went into it. So now his children. I have to go back again to his time in Israel, and he decided that that's where he wanted to be so that he could read a Hebrew newspaper. He went to Opan, and he met a girl there from France whose name was Florence. She had decided to make Aliyah and went to Israel to live. She carved out a wonderful career for herself. She bought a home in Tel Aviv and lived there. That was her home. Strangely enough, she and Bob kept in touch with each other periodically they would talk or write. 11 years later, they were married. She came through Omaha and met a girl that she knew from Israel in the bookshop. And the girl said, "What are you doing here?" And she told her she was buying material for her career there. So she says, "We should have an evening. How long will you be here?" She says, "Just 2 days." She says, "Well, we'll have an evening. I'll get together some people and you'll come to my apartment." So who will you have? Well, she mentioned Bob Brodkey. And Florence says, "He's not married?" And she says, "No." And Florence says, "That's very interesting." So she met Bob that evening at this friend's home and decided that that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to marry him and told him so. And we all went to Paris for the wedding. And that was she has never spoken anything but French to her children.
I'd like to hear about the wedding.
Well, you have two ceremonies in Paris. The civil service. You cannot be married unless you have a civil service first in the town hall, which of course we all went to. And then the next day went to the synagogue. We're married in the synagogue there. It seems to me, if I remember correctly, it was more or less an Orthodox service. I remember marching down the aisle with my son. It was a lot of fun. She's a lovely girl, just lovely. But Ron is married to Beth, and they went to school in Oklahoma. And Beth is born and raised from Oklahoma City. So I don't have to tell you what that means. She is my angel. I don't know how I would manage without her. No matter what it is, it's not too much for her. Everything that I even dream of asking about is available. She's just precious as can be. And you know, they have two children, Sharon and Mark. Sharon married an Israeli. It was not a good marriage. They went to Hong Kong. He was very bright and charming. But it was not a good marriage, and she wanted to come back to this country, but she did. And she brought Ariel back with her, and he's my great-grandson. And he was here yesterday to tell me that he hit a home run, and the bases were loaded, and do I have to tell you the excitement? That was great, just fun. I adore him. He's so much fun.
Does she live here in town?
She lives here in town and works for the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce. Has a good job. She's very capable and very bright.
Does she have just the one child?
She has not remarried.
And how about Ron's other child?
Well, Mark didn't want to be in a family-owned business. He wanted to be in business for himself. And he knew the jewelry business. So he opened up a little office, and that is his business. It's a personal touch business. People come to him and call him on the telephone, and that's how he sells his jewelry.
Does he live in town?
He lives here in town, has his office here, and does his business here. He owns a little home, and he has an above-ground swimming pool. Not married. 40 years old. Just last week.
Now, where's Bob now?
Bob lives in Arlington, Virginia, and he works for FEMA.
Still with the government then?
With the government. He has, I understand, he has a rating equal to a general. He's been with that agency now for over 35 years.
And you say Ron is keeping very busy.
Very busy.
What is he doing?
Well, Thursday is a humane society. They're crazy about animals. They've always had at least 2 dogs in their home. And he just loves going there. So he goes and works out at the J, and he swims in the morning, and then he does errands, and he's on umpteen different committees. I don't have to tell you what that means. He's very busy with meetings all the time, and with the temple. He's very active in the temple.
And how about Beth?
Well, she had a business, Bags and Baggage, which she gave birth to, and just before the market crashed, she sold it. He came to her and said, "You name it, I want your business," and she named it, and he said sold, and that was it. So she retired at the same time.
What is she doing now to keep busy?
She's busy with Ariel, her grandson. She adores him, and he's busy with him no matter what. No matter what.
Well, let's talk some more about your life. Going to school in Des Moines, in Sioux City, I'm sorry. Do you
Yes.
recall that your high school years?
Yes, and I went to Chicago. I told you
Yes.
I went to school in Chicago until I came back to Sioux City when the banks folded up during the Depression. Really, that was when Roosevelt closed up the banks and had the banks holiday. All the banks closed up. No one had any money, and no one could get any money. That was a real depression. And I remember how people stood in line looking for work. Mm-hmm.
Have you done much with your artwork over the years?
When I first came to Omaha, I remember putting on some plays at the Jewish Community Center and at the synagogue, and little reviews which I wrote and loved doing. But outside of that, no, haven't.
Now that we've talked about raising the 2 boys, I want to hear a little more about you and your husband's life.
Nothing unusual. Nothing unusual. We just had very close friends that we loved being with. He worked hard. As the years went on, they bought little stores in the country, and it was his job to open up the country stores and to find managers capable of running the stores, absentee ownership. So it was Fremont, Grand Island, trying to remember all the other stores. There are now 11. Just sprouted up along the way.
All that still carry the Brodkey name.
Yes, Brodkey jewelry. The House of Lucky Wedding Rings. Mustn't forget that. It's very important. And then when the malls opened up, you had to have a store in the malls. That's where the people are. That's where you have to be. Westroads, Oakview.
When did you become a resident of the Blumkin home?
I came here in January of '96. I had the foresight to what is now a boom, a real boom business, and that's the long care insurance. I knew that eventually that's where people would have to be. My nephew, David Rice, he was the son of Rose Brodkey, married to Sam Rice. He was an estate planner, and he sold insurance. And I spent a lot of time with him. And we discussed this. And we decided that that's what we should have. And the younger you are, the cheaper the insurance rates are, right? I owned it for a good many years. And that's how come I'm here today. I said I wanted my children to have it too, and they do. They bought it at a very early age.
And what do you do here to keep yourself busy?
Well, activities. No matter what they do, I'm busy with. And I start in the morning with exercises every morning. And Annie Joseph is an activities director here. And she runs a wonderful little agency, and she has great ideas about keeping us busy, and you can be as busy as you want to be. Now, there was a concert today at 1:30, but I knew that you were coming, and I didn't know for sure just when, so I didn't go to the concert. I came here instead, and I was reading my Time magazine.
Do you do a lot of reading?
Oh, yes. I always enjoy reading.
What kind of books do you read?
I don't read any books now because they're too heavy for me to hold while I read. I'm usually on my pad, on my back, because I have a very bad back problem. So I can read Time magazine because magazines are easy to hold. But no more books anymore.
Well, it's been a delight visiting with you.
Thank you.
It really has been.
Thank
Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered?
I'm just trying to think. Well, you see that little organ there? Ann Joseph brought that in here because I play the piano by ear. That's my big joy, playing the piano. I don't read music. I play by ear. And whenever I can get to the piano in the auditorium here, that's where you'll find me. It's a very busy room, that auditorium, and that piano is not available very often. But whenever it is, and I can get to it, that's what I do. And I play by ear on this little organ here that Ann Joseph brought me. It runs out of battery.
Do you suppose there's any chance we get you to play a little tune for us?
Well, of course.
Okay.
This is David Brodkey and Helen Friedman's engagement picture. It was taken here in Omaha. I never went with anyone else, and he didn't either. We were just made for each other, and that's how it ended. That's Esther Pauline Friedman and Pauline Esther Friedman, the twins. The Friedman twins were born on July 4th. 84 years ago. On July 4th, 84 years ago, I remember being in the hall with my father. My mother was in the bedroom across the hall with her mother and the doctor because she was in labor. Shortly after that, the doctor came out in the hall and said, "Mr. Friedman, congratulations, you have a lovely daughter." And my grandmother came out in the hall and says, "Come back, doctor, there's another one." And that's how we knew they were twins. Now, they came back here last year for my 90th birthday. Ann Landers and dear Abby. We had a wonderful reunion. It was a great, great time for all of us to be together. Unforgettable. I, Abraham Friedman, Next is my mother, Rebecca Rushall Friedman. Next to her is Rebecca Rushall for David Brodkey, kind, thoughtful, generous, caring, loving, wonderful person. The top left picture is Mark. Next to him is his mother, Beth, and next to her is Ron. And there is me, and there is Bob, and there is Florence, and there is Sharon. Down on the floor, below, is David, and Ariel, and Naomi. On Thanksgiving, we always had a family reunion. There is Mark standing behind his father, Ron. Then is Beth. Then is me, and then is Florence. And there is Bob, and behind Bob is David. And on the floor is Naomi, and Ariel, and Sharon. A picture of Ron, 8 years old, and Bob, 4 years old. It was very important for me to have pictures. As you see, my whole house is full of pictures and albums filled with pictures. And so I wanted pictures of them at that age, and that's how that happened.
Would you like to leave a message for your children and grandchildren?
I want them to know that they come from very caring people, and I hope that they will continue to love and to care for their own as years gone by.